Thank you very much. And it feels wonderful to at least be able to join you online. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your gathering, your day. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share some slides over the next 25 minutes to talk us through what do we mean by Doughnut Economics, what do we mean by the changes and the transformations that will need to unfold in the world of business. So let me get straight to it. Firstly, a little bit more about me so you know where this perspective is coming from. I worked for a long time in the business world. I moved into the development sector and working with agriculture and smallholder farmers in Indonesia and West Africa. Went into Oxfam, which is a global NGO and campaigning organization, and most recently was the CEO of the World Fair Trade Organization, and now I've got a dual role. I work at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, leading the work on business and enterprise, as well as teaching at University of Cambridge. So, with that in mind, this is what I work on, which is the donut that was so eloquently explained, and it's an important framework because it's one that brings together both the social and ecological goals that we must all work towards. On the outside is that ecological ceiling. These are the 9 planetary boundaries that Earth system scientists have told us we must not transgress. We have to stay within these boundaries. Now, climate change is one of them, but biodiversity loss or land conversion or chemical pollution, freshwater withdrawals, ocean acidification, there are so many. And these 9, they work together. There's a balance and we have to stay within the limits. But what's also critical that my colleague Kate Rayworth identified to create the donut is that there's also the social foundation. Now, these are the essentials of human life. This is what people need in order to live a good life. And this is water, food, health, education, income that we need, housing that we need, energy that we need, the things that actually the world's governments have agreed through the social SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So if we think of these 2 boundaries, that we don't want to go beyond the ecological ceiling and we don't want to fall short on life's essentials, in between these 2 boundaries is that safe and just space for humanity, which is the goal for human prosperity. This is where our economy, our businesses, our financial systems need to point everything towards. We need to stay in balance. Now, Doughnut Economics is actually a part of a much bigger and broader set of ideas, of thinking, of movements that are transcending new economic thinking. So we're part of many, and Doughnut Economics lives alongside them. And we're also alongside many organizations that are working with similar sorts of systems change that we're trying to drive. Now, the donut is one thing, but Doughnut Economics then asks the question, well, what do we need to do to get inside the donut? And what the answer to that my colleague Kate Rayworth, when she wrote this book and came up with the concept, identified is that this is actually a transformation in the way we think about economics. This is a transition to a new 21st century economics. And there's a whole range of things we need to move. We need to move from being in pursuit of GDP to having the goal of getting the donut. We need to see the bigger picture beyond that self-contained market to seeing the market as a part of a much bigger system that includes other elements like the household and the commons and the state, but as well as that living, that market economy living within society and being in service of society, which then lives within the boundaries of the planet more broadly. It's about human nature and rethinking what are the essential drivers of humans beyond just rational economic man. It's about getting towards getting savvy with systems. So beyond mechanical approaches to dynamic complexity. And 2 things I'm going to touch on much more: designing to distribute and creating to regenerate. And I think these 2 I'll unpack in more detail as well. So to jump forward a little bit, this is the picture that I really want everybody to absorb for a second, because this is the reality of the donut as we currently are. We are currently in overshoot on the majority of the planet's boundaries, and we are falling short on life's essentials for hundreds of millions of people around the world. This is like a collective selfie for humanity. We are in overshoot and we are in shortfall, and there's a transition, a transformation of our economies, businesses, and finance that is required if we are going to reverse this trend. At a national level, we see some interesting statistics as well. And there's a real story that emerges here where the high income global north countries have, by and large, been able to meet a lot of their people's needs by using much more than their fair share of natural resources. And the global south, or global majority countries, lower income countries, have actually not used their fair share, but are falling short even more. And there's a trajectory here that's been emerging among different countries, and there's a reversal that is needed around the world. So that more is available in terms of any country, but the story is the same. And the story tells us that no countries in the donut. One country is closest, and if you were to guess and you guessed Costa Rica, you would be right. But currently, every country has a transition, a transformation that is needed. So, what does this mean for the world of business? If this is the picture that has emerged from the economic activity on this planet, then what is the role of business? Well, firstly, it's important to recognize that over the last year or two, there's been some stepping back from leadership on sustainability and regenerative economics and the kind of change we need from the corporate world. We've seen mainstream companies like Unilever water down some of their pledges, including on social issues like living wage. And we've also seen companies set targets on the Science Based Targets Initiative, but so many fail to take the action that is necessary. Meanwhile, we've seen circularity decline as more and more materials are used from around the world. And I'll introduce this concept of circular economy in a second as well. Meanwhile, the financial indicators of success are telling us that the economy is on the right path. Again, we've been seeing all-time highs of stock markets over the last week or so. It's almost as if the design of our financial and commercial institutions are saying, this is good, we're doing well, we're on the right track. And our social and ecological indicators are saying, no, the alarm bells are off and we are not on the right track. There's a mismatch between what's needed from ecology and society and what the financial and commercial indicators are saying. One of the things that undermines this and is a big part of this picture that you've been seeing is a model of take, make, use, lose. This linear model where we take from Earth its resources, we make things with those resources, we use things and we lose things, and we repeat this over and over again. And to reverse this, to change this, we're starting to see some exciting ideas. I mentioned that this is about circular economy as a part of it. And I mentioned that creating to regenerate, one of the key principles of Doughnut Economics, is central. Well, this is where it comes together, where we look at all the materials on Earth and think, are they a biological material or a human-made technical material? And as a result, which loop are they going into? Are they going into a biological nutrient loop where they go back into nature, or are they being restored as a technical material? And the essential goal here is to design out waste of material and design out waste of energy. And being regenerative builds on this idea and saying that we need to work with and within the cycles of the living world. But of course, the ecologically regenerative is already beginning to play out in the business world. We are beginning to see businesses put this into practice, whether it is modular product design. So every product can be modular, every product can be repairable. We can design out waste at the very design of the product at the beginning. We're beginning to see examples like Fairphone doing this, but others as well. We're beginning to see energy providers like Cellco in India providing rural renewable energy by also supporting local technicians who will repair and uphold that. We're beginning to see circularity in fashion, for instance, Houdini designing its garments so that the natural fibers and the synthetic fibers can easily be separated and going into different routes. And we're beginning to see examples like Sanergy toilets in Kenya, which is saying even human waste can be treated, sanitized, and can go back into agriculture and back into the cycle of the living world. Now, of course, the ecological is not the only element of the story. There's also the social side, and that's critical in Doughnut Economics. And that is about going from a world of divisive and high inequality to a distributive model, a socially distributive one, which is sharing opportunity and value with all who co-created. And here as well, we have the critical observation that there are businesses that are designing their approach, their operations, their practices to be socially distributive. For instance, Creative Handicrafts in Mumbai, which is giving workers a voice, workers representation, and committing long-term to their workforce, including by being co-owned by the workers that are manufacturing and producing the garments. Or examples like Richer Sounds here in the UK, where I currently am, which is converting its business into an employee ownership model where the employees are co-owners and they have a long-term commitment to each other. Examples like Airbnb that are putting a big proportion of their revenues back into communities for the community to decide how to use it. Or examples like Lush, which are using the fair tax mark to demonstrate they are not minimizing their tax bill. They're recognizing the contribution of businesses to the education and health and infrastructure and everything else that's critical for business to survive. And Lush is also in going through a model of being co-owned by its own workforce. So the founders will own part of the business and the employees another part. These hybrids are emerging, these interesting innovations are emerging. But what is critical is that what I'm sharing with you are not the mainstream. These are exceptions, right? When we look around at any industry, we're not seeing the same regenerative and distributive models as the mainstream prevalent model. So we need to transform business. And to transform business, there are many critical levers. So you might think, actually, what we really need is regulation. We need exerting public pressure. We need consumers to demand this. We need workers to have some voice, and we need regulation to level the playing field and make sure that this is required of all companies. Actually, you might say, actually, we need enlightened leaders. We need leaders who are going to push the envelope into a new frontier. You might say we need to measure impacts more effectively, set targets more effectively, or you might say we need to make the business case more effectively, demonstrate that in the long term, this is critical for the business's own survival. But what Doughnut Economics does is recognizes all of these levers are critical, but for them to be effective and then for them to be unhindered, we're going to need businesses that are designed to support and not hinder these efforts. And that means that we're going to need businesses that can drive ambition so that the regulations are implemented ambitiously. We're going to need businesses that can unblock and support the way for enlightened leaders. We're going to need businesses that are designed to not just set commitments and targets, but actually follow through on the transformation of their own revenue models and business models more broadly. And we're going to need to see businesses that are able to make a broader business case, not just a short term and not just a financial one. All of this requires a transformation of the deep design of business itself. And to understand this, for Doughnut Economics, to look at the journey businesses need to take from that left-hand side, that 20th century model, last century's degenerative and divisive economies, and to move towards the 21st century model of regenerative and distributive economies. What we need to look at is the deep design of business itself and ask ourselves, is business designed around the question, how much value can we extract through this enterprise? Or is it designed around the question, how many benefits can we generate through this enterprise? To understand the design of business, what we use is a framework that was pioneered by the author, researcher, and thought leader Marjorie Kelly, who says that to understand design, we need to ask about the purpose of the business. Why does it exist? Its networks, its governance model, its ownership model, and its finance. And through these 5 layers of design, we can then get to the core design of the business itself. Is it designed to extract value, or is it designed to create benefits? So let me give you a couple of examples. If we think about purpose, the purpose of a company, why does it exist? Well, we can look to examples like Tony's Chocolonely, which has said that, look, we exist to make 100% slave-free the norm in chocolate. Now, this is great because the purpose is not about the company itself. It's about what the company's contribution is more broadly in transforming the economy. A common purpose, by the way, among the more authentic and pioneer businesses, where it's not just about them, but it's about what are they doing to drive bigger change. But it's not just about what they say. It's also how they pay their suppliers, how they are committed to their supply chain to make sure there are equitable trading terms and there are more effective and equitable conditions for farmers and workers. And to lock that in, they've created something called a Tony's Mission Lock. So they've created guardian shares, special shares that aren't dividend bearing, but have got special voting rights that can make sure the business doesn't walk away from its purpose. It remains committed to its purpose. Next is networks. So these are the relationships a business has, and how do we go from those extractive relationships to more collaborative ones? And here we have examples like El Puente, one of the first businesses in the world to also be verified as a people and planet first enterprise. And El Puente is fascinating because on its board, it has representatives from its supply chain, from its workforce, from its customers, its founders, and others. And what's critical is that that completely changes the depth of the relationship. The network relationship means that it has a deep commitment to its supply chain, and supply chain is co-governing and co-owning the business as well. Next is governance. And here, how do we move towards governance, not just serving finance, but serving purpose? Examples like faith in nature, creating models that put nature on the board of a company. So they say we're the first company in the world to give nature a voice and a vote, but we don't want to be the last. We're starting to see interesting models of governance that build on this, like House of Hackney that has said we're going to put nature on our board, and we're also going to put future generations represented on our board. And they're doing this, companies like Faith in Nature are doing this by using the organization Lawyers for Nature as a member of its board, as a corporate entity that has rights on its board to represent the rights of nature. And fourth is ownership. So how are we designing ownership? And is the ownership model enabling or holding back ambitious action? So often traditional models of ownership can hold back ambition, whether it's venture capital or share markets or private equity. Oftentimes they can be a force that prevents an ambitious agenda from leadership or from the business more deeply. And instead, more regenerative models of ownership are emerging, like Patagonia, which has said we're going to have Earth as our only shareholder. And what Patagonia is building on and drawing from is an idea called steward ownership, where the shares are divided into 2 classes of shares. One class of shares has all the dividend rights, but none of the voting rights. The other class of shares has all the voting rights, but none of the dividend rights. So separating money and power in the ownership. So those that hold the voting rights are there for the purpose of the business. Those that hold the dividend rights get what's left over, allowing the business to focus much longer term. That model of steward ownership, for instance, is expanding around the world. We've got companies like ShareTribe in Finland, Ecosia, even Bosch in Germany have converted to steward ownership. And last, and maybe most critically, in the design and understanding the design of business is to look at the role and the shape of finance. Is it finance there to serve itself, or is it there to serve a purpose? Whether it's profit reinvestment models like the community-owned renewable energy that is spreading across Europe called the Res Co-op model, or models of much more flexible margins, having dividend caps that allow the business to focus on internal financing of ambitious initiatives, looking at more flexible margin opportunities. All of these new models of financing are critical. And if we're talking to startups, then this question is all about the risk capital that is coming into business. Where, is it on the terms that it's going to support the long-term purpose of the company? If we're talking to companies that are more mature, it's about asking about the capital needs of the business and the terms on which finance is coming in and shaping its long-term future. Across these 5 layers of design, what we get to is a way to understand how have we shaped businesses. And there are so many models that are emerging now around the world, from, as I mentioned, steward ownership to guardianship models for board governance, to co-ownership models and mission lock and guardianship, to artisan ownership models, all kinds of hybrids that are emerging across these alternatives. We've just published a set of case studies, actually 14 case studies that look at the deep design of very different businesses from around the world. And what they tell us is that some of the most ambitious action that businesses are pursuing are enabled by elements of their deep design. Elements of their deep design, such as their ownership model, their governance structure, their financing model, all of which has been pivotal to unlocking the ambition that's needed. I mentioned finance as being central, and an important thing to look at is that there's such a broad range of innovation now happening in finance. We're beginning to see interesting models from across the financial spectrum, from revenue-based finance to impact-linked finance. We're beginning to see a lot of alternatives to venture capital or private equity for particularly early-stage businesses that want to bring in more patient capital, capital that is more aligned to their likely revenue model, and one that's going to allow them to focus on their organization's purpose. And we're starting to see interesting models like exit to community and systemic investing in that mix as well. So to summarize, the benefits of redesigning company are plentiful. It helps us align the purpose across the business. Purpose doesn't just live in a statement on the website, doesn't just live in a sustainability team. It's across the product design, the CFO's team, the supply chain, marketing, human resources. Across the business, we can see an alignment. We can also enable deeper partnerships by designing for them, designing in deep supply chain partnerships, collaborations with governments, with communities, with peers in the business. We can also unlock investment. We've seen a decline in internal investment in businesses, especially larger corporations around the world, and we can design to enable the business to invest into its own long-term future and into the innovations that it needs to pursue. We can help lock in the legacy, so it doesn't just rely on an individual. In family-owned businesses, for instance, often there is an individual or a group that is the custodian of the legacy and the mission and purpose, and we can design to reinforce that by bringing other stakeholders onto the board, by locking things in through guardian shares or through the articles of the business. There are lots of options, but most importantly, I would say, is to become regenerative and socially distributive by design. We're going to need to redesign businesses at their core. Now, I've done this work over the last, more than a decade, really, but specifically this model I've shown you of purpose networks, governance, ownership, finance. I've done this work now with over 900 companies, and I've learned a few tips. And here are my 5 key tips. One is focus on the practical ideas that need unlocking. If you ask yourself the question, what is my business needing to become to stay relevant, to become a part of the future economy? If you can identify those ideas, you can then design your ownership model, your governance structure to truly prioritize them. Explore diverse enterprise designs. Now, there are great off-the-shelf examples, including steward ownership and employee ownership and social enterprise, and so many interesting models. But you might need to create your bespoke model and innovate based on them. At the heart of this is redesigning the relationship with finance so that finance is a partner, but is not the purpose of the business. And that means often for early stage businesses, for instance, looking at alternatives to venture capital. For engaging in public policy, this is critical, and we're beginning to see interesting examples of cities like Leuven setting up startup investment funds that are supporting steward-owned companies. We're starting to see employee ownership transformation tax breaks, for instance, in the United Kingdom. Last year, we saw 37% growth of employee ownership because those who sell their business to their workers don't pay capital gains tax. We're starting to see interesting public policies that are shaping this agenda and deepening the innovation. And critically, let's make it fun. It's about the future, it's about exciting people, and it's about really designing what we need. So if you're interested, you can find resources on our website. We've created a tool that any business can use to apply to themselves, and any consultancy or network that can show that its values align through completing a short form. Well, they can also use these tools for free with their clients and their networks. We just require them to sign up. But if you go to doughuteconomics.org, you can see the tool that allows people to run workshops directly with companies, step-by-step guidance on the entire process. And if you're interested in a whole range of tools, working with cities, working with governments, working with communities, with educators, working with academia research, and of course, my area, working with businesses and enterprise, then please visit doughuteconomics.org, have a look at our tools and our themes. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be with you. I'm looking forward to a few questions.
Thank you very much, Erinch. It was very inspiring. You can't see us, but they are really interested in what you just said. And we have a lot of questions. Again, the audience was pre-prepared and posted few questions before you started. So they have something to ask you about. Maybe I would start with the question about KPIs. What key performance indicators align with the goals of the Doughnut Economics?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think ultimately we need KPIs that are about the transformation of the business models themselves. There was a recent PwC survey that showed that about half of global CEOs recognize their business has to transform. And that means that they need to change the kind of products they sell, the kind of services they offer, the very design of their operations, their supply chains, etc. So there's a huge transformation agenda that's needed. Now, you can break that down into elements, but what I have found working with business leaders is when given the space and the courage, they know the changes their business needs to undergo. And if we can identify those changes, if you're in fashion, then we need to move away from fast fashion. This needs to be a completely different business model. If you're in electronics, this needs to become repairable products that you're selling or maybe renting. If you're in construction, this is a very different sort of model of construction that is repurposing existing buildings and creating affordable and eco homes, for instance. Across the board, energy, agriculture, there are huge transformations. So the KPIs need to be about, are we taking the steps needed to transform the core of what the business does? Because we know that the 20th century models of operation are no longer fit for purpose, and we can't delay that transition. So that ambitious transition to the new business models, I think, is the most important place to focus the KPIs.
Okay, you've been talking about the governance too in the presentation, and there's a question which is quite trending. How should companies rethink their governance structures to align with social and ecological priorities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one is to think, who are the stakeholders that need to have a voice, that need to be represented? And the reason I shared quite a few examples about different kind of board structures, having the supply chain represented, having nature represented, having future generations represented on your board, is because I think this can be really helpful to change the direction. Now, this is about actually giving different powers and responsibilities to those board members, for instance, to represent truly that external perspective in the business. And it means that we start to change the culture where the representatives are just the representatives of shareholders. That's meaningful. In addition to this, I think the way we report, the way that we carry out transparency about impacts is absolutely critical. And thirdly, governance really goes together with ownership. So shaping the ownership model alongside it. Are there long-term business partners here where a much more collaborative approach is possible if there's a sense of co-ownership? So if there is, for instance, if you're in coffee or in chocolate, I know those industries fairly well. future supply is going to be a problem. Climate change is already hitting the production of some of these crops. Long-term partnerships with farmers and farming communities is going to be critical. So, okay, how can we design the governance and the ownership so that those farmers see you as a priority customer, a priority supply chain? That means that we're starting to design things like Cafe Direct or Equal Exchange that are saying we're going to have you as a co-ownership model over time. And there's a long-term commitment to each other that comes through. Now, this isn't a solution to everything, but I think representation and having models of co-ownership with those long-term partners starts to unlock not just a better consideration of social and ecological impacts, but also a deeper partnership and collaboration that can also bring great value to the business and much more resilience when hard times hit. You've got deep partnerships to lean on.
Thank you. We have another trending question, and it has kind of a dark side question there too, or fellow question. Like the first one is: do you think the world is ready for the donut? And maybe what countries, in your opinion, are good candidates for the donut? But on the opposite side of the questions, there's a bit negative approach. How can this, let's say, nice concept work in a real life with real average consumers without totalitarian practices, black market, and loss of innovativeness? So kind of like two different poles.
Yeah, and I think that's really well put to put those two poles together, because I think there is truth in both those observations. That yes, we need the leaders and the pioneers to be pushing the envelope and to demonstrate what is possible, and we need to put pressure on the laggards, on those that are not moving and that are holding back ambition. And I think it's going to be a multifaceted, I think, strategy. And what comes to mind is the concept of tipping points. So change often happens very, very slowly with lots of little, often marginal seeming pioneers. And then we reach a tipping point, and then suddenly things change quickly. And I can see that beginning to happen with the kind of economic models that are emerging. And we're seeing innovation in cities around the world, in national governments like Barbados and Bhutan that we're working with, or examples from cities like Amsterdam and Copenhagen and Melbourne and Ipoh in Malaysia. We're starting to see these innovative leaders at a local level that are saying we're going to reshape our economic agenda locally. And we're starting to see this in the business world as well. I mentioned some of the business leaders, but there are thousands and thousands of such businesses around the world. So I think investing into building the new, and a quote reminds me of a quote, which is, you do not change the existing reality by just fighting against it. You have to build the system that makes it obsolete, that replaces it. And I think a part of this is we need to build this alternative and be ready for crises and be ready as a proof of concept. And I think I'm seeing an acceleration of that commitment to those new emerging models.
Thank you. Obviously, you're a donut pioneer and promoter, but I would maybe ask you about something, or ask the question from the eventee. Using your experience, previous experience from World Fair Trade Organization, what positive and measurable impact on quality of life and attractiveness have you seen in the cities that applied donut tools and concepts, and probably maybe the places where the fair trade has been, say, rising?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I've seen on both sides is a deepening engagement and seeing us as more than just economic practitioners. We are humans, right? We are people, and we have a competitive side and we have a collaborative, mutualistic, cooperative side. And models of economic design, economic policy, of business and commerce that appeal to the latter, to that mutualistic, deep, long-term collaborative side, I think brings out a very positive cycle. We're seeing this, I think, in local governments, and there are now more than 90 cities around the world, 90, that are using Doughnut Economics in this way, and they're beginning to look at ideas and like housing and transport through a perspective of not just ecological but social too. and not just local, but global too. And that is bringing out a much richer plan, a more resilient plan. And I think what I learned in the fair trade movement was something very similar, that long-term and global focus for consumers, citizens around the world can bring positive benefits in the way they treat each other and in the long-term partnerships they build with each other as well.
And when talking about specifically about entrepreneurs, what are the skills, let's say, they should develop? Do you have some tips there?
Yeah, I mean, if you're an entrepreneur, you're from an early stage business or a startup, a couple of key things. One is get skilled up in the term sheet and deal terms. If you're going to bring in equity investment, then what will happen is that the equity investor, the external investor, will have very good lawyers. They will have very good ways for them to win the deal, and that's how the lawyers will think. They will think, I trained as a lawyer back 20 years ago. I know that profession. They will try to win, and the entrepreneurs often do not have the same expensive lawyers as the investment funds have, and as a result, the deal terms can be skewed. So I think have a look at the deal terms. If you're accepting investment, make sure that you understand what happens in terms of governance, in terms of who sits on the board, and the exit expectations of the investor. I think secondly is to engage with these ideas of what you want your business to be longer term, and to keep certain things possible. I've met so many entrepreneurs who have shaken their head and said, I wish I was more careful in who came into my business, who was the investor, who was the commercial partner. And I think retaining a level of independence ends up being critical. And thirdly, look at all the different options for finance. Lots of the ecosystem, the incubators, often they've been very charmed by the venture capital route, which will point you towards being, a unicorn company, 10x growth, etc. That isn't the right path for many businesses. For some, there is. That's a good match, and that's great. But for many businesses, most businesses around us, they're not going to be the right match for the venture capital model. So you're going to need to look at alternatives, look at other ways that you might get the capital that you need, and maybe you can actually grow the business without the capital, external capital either, if that is a possibility, and that could be an ideal situation for some businesses in some contexts. So understand the term sheets, keep a clear view over the long-term vision of the business, and stay stubborn to that. And thirdly, make sure you look at all the alternatives for financing that go beyond just the traditional venture capital investment for startups.
And when you take it from the position of the venture investors, how should they deal with what you said? How should they proceed in this framework with their money?
So I think that they too have a huge role in innovation, and we're beginning to see innovation on that space as well, where they're not just coming in and saying, these are my financial parameters, this is my mandate, and you have to fit in my parameters. We're beginning to see then we go, okay, well, the revenue model of this business is going to require a certain kind of patience, certain kind of support, and maybe this is a 3x business or a 2x business or a 4x business. And that's okay. Let's foster that. And this other one is a 10x business, and we'll support that journey. So I think a lot of it is also about figuring out and supporting the right approach for different businesses. It takes a bit more time. It takes a bit more engagement. It might feel more risky, but actually you end up with a much richer portfolio and a better understanding if you invest the time to understand the entrepreneur's vision and the enterprise's own possibilities, and then designing your investment instruments accordingly. That feels absolutely pivotal. And I think that actually it's much more engaging for venture investors to be a part of that journey. It's a bit more time commitment, but it's a lot more fulfilling, a lot more successful longer term as well.
Okay, Erinch, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for connecting with us. Thank you for your insights. It was Erinch Sahan, the head of Doughnut Economics Action Lab.
Thank you, friends. Absolute pleasure.